funny. All the jokes. And big thank you to Jesse for sticking around and helping us with the tech. Run the controls. Yeah. Oh, I see. So it just runs it like this. I can't see. The audio appears to be off.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Paul, can you really not hear us? It's on the city.
Can any, Helen or Beth or Janet, can you guys hear us? Meeting TV could.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, great. Sorry guys, these are your chairs.
If folks want to sign up to speak, the sheet is out there. He's up there.
Maybe, yeah. Nice little present.
Yeah, but where I learned my fight is from my John. Where I learned my fight was from my mom. Now that was a fight.
Yes. If you don't mind, Brian was gonna help you, but he's not here.
Unless you want it.
Yeah. And,
Can
okay.
people to Zoom or you have the authority, the power?
Wow.
So everyone is in now, they'll show.
He's a pro. Thank you.
Is your daughter,
All right.
No.
she's definitely doing this year again. Let's see if she does it next year. Just pull a lot of.
So
Does he know where he's supposed to be?
unclear, yeah, but would you mind until he gets your, so this is what we have for sign up so far. We're not too. And then. We're doing it
Yeah.
first.
Around.
Yes.
That was
Just
just.
took me the time to relax.
I don't know how people do this. It's right. Take them apart. Exactly. So I was thinking.
This way, there's more people trying to get in here. There you go, right over here.
That's someone in the waiting room. Oh, okay. All right, so we'll start in just a second. Can someone on Zoom indicate if you can hear us okay? Okay, great. So we have the sign up sheet here, for folks that want to speak in person, and we'll start with those folks, and then I'll rotate to Zoom, and people can put their hands up. But first, so thank you, for everyone, for coming out. I still call it afternoon because it's light out, but I guess it's evening. We've heard from so many folks in the community that really wanted a space to talk about housing specifically, and at our legislative forums, we want to leave space for all different topics that are of concern to our constituents. So we were excited to host this housing specific legislative forum. And before I introduce myself, and then we'll go around, so I'm Representative Emily Krasnow, and I represent Chittenden 9. And I serve on the House General and Housing Committee. So housing, labor related issues, and other general affair issues. And before we start, I'm so grateful that Representative Tom Stevens, who chairs that committee, has joined us on the screen, and just grateful that he took the time to hear from our community members, and I'm sure we'll have continued dialogue moving forward as things move. So yeah, do we want to go over to our fabulous timekeeper?
Martin Lalonde, and I'm the representative for Chittenden 12.
Kate Nugent, Chittenden 10. Also, I apologize, I have to leave just a little before 6 to pick up my son, so.
Hello, I'm in Chittenden 8. I'm in Human Services, so if anyone has anything, childcare, that kind of thing, if you want to talk afterwards, I'll be available for a little while.
And we will also be joined by our 5th representative, Representative Brian Minier, and he serves on House Education. I will also point out we are joined by our Lieutenant Governor, David Zuckerman. Thank you so much for coming. Heinsberg resident, not too far off 116. Do we have, I think, are all our city councilors here? Let's, yep.
We've got
Can I
5.
just also share that this is a Warren City Council meeting as well, and with a quorum, with all of the council here, they may use the information heard tonight to make different decisions in the future. So to me, our open meeting law, just wanted to note that as well.
Yeah, and we have some other folks trickling in as well, so I'm gonna leave the sign up sheet in an accessible place to folks. I guess here, well, then I'll have to get it though. I guess right here would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So we'll just give it one more minute for people signed up. Oh, great, thanks, Megan. All right, I just have to. Megan, if you could just tell me who's first on the list. All right, thanks. So we're gonna keep it at about 3 minutes per person. Oh yeah, and then obviously, if we have more time, we can circle back to folks. Folks, oh, there's some folks.
Not doing my job very well.
Like to add those, yeah. Okay, so let's start with Mike Simino.
And I'm gonna give a 30-second warning.
Thank you, Martin.
30-second warning.
I never need that.
That's good.
So, first I want to thank you guys for putting in all the time and effort at trying to come up with something that hopefully the end result can be reconciled and be something that is a win-win for our community and our state. The concern that I want to talk about has actually come up a few times, and that has to do with the capacity of our community, or perhaps others, to choose to exceed what the state's requirements or limitations might be. on some things, whether it be a wetland buffer, energy standards, or what have you. It just feels to me that that would be very chaotic if everybody had the capacity to do that. It would create an unbelievable amount of anxiety when you think that you might live in an environment where, you know, because of the zeal or the political disposition of those in charge, that somebody could decide, hey, we're going to exceed what the state limitations are, and we're going to impose more on you. So I just think that that is really something that you've got to consider not allowing to happen, because it just seems that it would be chaos, and that people would be subject to the zeal and the whims of political disposition. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we'll hear from Andrew Chalnick.
Thank you all, and
Counter exact.
thank.
Point, counterpoint, Andrew.
Sure, Mike. Thank you for coming and listening. So yeah, I wanted to address two particular provisions in S.100. So the first is a provision which would allow 5 units per acre across any district that allows for residential development and that provides for water and sewer. South Burlington happens to have districts like that. And the districts that we have, some of those areas have environmental protections that have been in place for a long time, some of the areas. So for instance, the SEQ, South Burlington's SEQ, designated natural resource protection areas, I think roughly 1,500 acres thereabouts, a couple decades ago. Those areas are intended to be protected. They allow for very limited residential development on certain lots that don't have any other development potential and are large. But there's been very little development, and that basically encompasses the forests and the buffers in the SEQ that this community made a decision a couple of decades ago are really, really important to protect. And I know that those lands are valued by most of the people in this room, and I don't believe that building over those lands is the way to solve the housing problem that we've identified. It's just the wrong solution. And Chris, correct if I'm wrong, Chris and I were chatting, and I believe the Affordable Housing Committee also agrees that the protections in Article 12, which includes these natural resource protection areas, should not be overridden. Those protections should remain in place. So I don't really think there's that much disagreement in this room, and I'm sure there'll be some dissonant voices about what should be done with those lands, but I think it's a mistake to think that those lands should be built over, and as written right now, they could be. Senator Keisha Hinsdale has proffered an amendment that would exclude those lands. I'm not sure the status of that amendment because I'm not a scholar of Senate procedure. I see it on the Senate website. I would, urge that the amendment that she drafted be included in any final version of this bill to protect those NRP lands. There's another set of protections that the city developed for habitat blocks during its interim zoning a few years ago. Habitat blocks are also potentially at risk under S.100, and I would urge that S.100 be amended to protect the habitat blocks. These habitat blocks were studied by environmental consultants that South Burlington hired, and again, I don't think there's much disagreement. Again, I know the Affordable Housing Committee agrees that habitat blocks should be protected. With all the work that was done, the habitat blocks are there for biodiversity. They're to protect our water, protect our air, protect Lake Champlain. We learned that Chittenden County is the most biodiverse county in Vermont, and that's why we protected it. The third thing that we put in place are conservation plan unit developments, where for particular parcels, if they're going to be developed, the developer needs to conserve a portion and then build densely on the remainder. Senator Hinsdale also proffered an amendment that would protect the conservation PUDs. And I would urge that that amendment also be included. So that's kind of the first thing, the 5-unit break provision that I want to address. I then also want to address.
So the
Yeah.
time is up. Now, if you want to return, if we
Sure.
get through everybody before 6:30, because I understand this
Thank you,
has to end
Norm.
at 6:30,
6:20.
6:20, then we'll come back to you.
Thank you.
But let's because there's a lot of people I think want to speak.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Now can we hear from Tyler Barnes?
I'll yield for, well, okay. I'll be brief.
Okay.
I appreciate all of the work that has been done by the Senate thus far and all the work that you have in front of you. Thank you for giving us the time to speak with you today, your thoughts. I'm not gonna lie, this is uncomfortable for me personally, because I respect my colleagues tremendously on the city council, and I applaud all the hard work that they put into the LDRs. I think every single person has on the city council has had a hand in crafting them, and I applaud them for that, and I respect them deeply for that, and I think that they were all very well intentioned. It's awkward for me because if I had to choose between whether or not between those LDRs and S.100 and which one better serves the needs of our citizens and our businesses and our community, I'm inclined to lean in favor of S.100, and that does not come lightly, it does not come easily, and it does not come in agreement with my colleagues in the council. But it's something that I, as a longtime resident, firmly believe. And for a number of reasons, I will leave the economic reasons to other folks in the room, because I think they can speak better to it than I can. My concern is about equity. And what's good for some is good for all. And if we are going to impose density restrictions on certain parts of the city, I feel strongly that we should be doing it everywhere and not just in select portions of the city. I have grave concerns that that will yield unintended socioeconomic consequences and create divisions in our community at a time when we should all be coming closer together as opposed to driving one another further apart. And I don't think that these things are intentional, but I think that they exist. I think that they're already happening. And I think that we have a responsibility to stop it and to reverse direction on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. Counselor Barnes. Peter Pluma.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Plumeau. I've lived in the southeast quadrant of South Burlington for over 20 years, and I'm here mainly to express my very strong support for S.100 because I think it will do a lot to help Vermont, South Burlington, Chittenden County, all parts of the state provide or at least facilitate badly needed affordable housing for all Vermonters, regardless of their economic status. That said, I'd like to make two key points that are really derived from my 30 years of professional work in economic development and regional planning. First, the future economic vitality of the state as a whole and South Burlington as part of the Chittenden County region, which is, as we all know, the state's true economic engine. Because we are in the core of the state's economic engine and will likely continue to be, we need housing near jobs for all people, not just the affluent. We need housing for the people that work at Owls and Beta and on Logic and the UVM Medical Center. Secondly, forcing people to live farther from where they work, where the jobs are, as the current policies in South Burlington and elsewhere in the state will do, will have a negative impact on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, as well as on, as I mentioned, the economic health of the region and the state. So I strongly support this, and I thank you very much for your consideration.
Thanks, Peter. And next we have Tom Bailey.
Hey, I've already circulated a memo to you all and to others, and so I won't belabor that point. Andrew, I have a couple of disagreements with you. One is, everybody doesn't agree. You had this idea that somehow we are all basically really agreed with the conclusions that you.
So, yeah, direct your comments to the board or
Okay.
the board, to the legislators.
Thank
Point of
you.
order. Sorry,
Point of
No
order.
I won't direct them to Andrew.
Thank you.
I'll just comment on Andrew's comments. How's that?
That's okay.
And basically, we don't all agree. I think there's a real disagreement. That's why we're here. Something that Tyler's said kind of cued in with me, and that is, was a discussion about the NRP and how it's actually been in place for quite a long time. Andrew's right about that. That's part of the reason that we have some of the problems we do. We've actually created this circumstance. So we actually have, no surprise, NRP as a census district is the highest income in the state. I'm not faulting people for having money, and I think it's great. But on the other hand, we have that inequality. We've made that land impossible for people to buy into. And that's because we set it up that way. And it's still being set up that way. S.100 very modestly attempts to change the metric a little bit. Instead of having basically being unbuildable down there, then when there's water and sewer, like most places, build around it, build, because we need the housing and we need the growth, we need the development. Beta needs employees and they can't find them now because we don't have any nearby. So rather than just put a circle around South Burlington and say, we're special and we get to set our own water and sewer because it expands beyond the city, the state requirements, and we get to set our own other rules because we're special. And guess what? There's more land that's taken off from development. And because again, it shouldn't happen that way. We're not just a city, we're a region, we're a community, and we need to be the economic driver that we can be. Accept change. Let's go for it.
Thank you so much. Next, and I just want to let folks on Zoom know we will get to you. I see many hands up. I'm gonna go with what I've seen on council meetings for different cities where we go to folks who are in the room first and then we'll get to you. But if you have an urgency and need to speak because you have to depart, just let us know. I think we can see the chat, so thank you. Okay, next we're gonna hear from Roseanne Greco.
Good evening, everybody. I'm gonna try to keep this really short because I sent you all a memo, which an email, which I hope you got. I'd like to have you just consider this S.100 in conjunction with other bills and with other problems. So we face many problems and you have a lot to do and you have a lot on your plate. I'm urging you just to consider each problem in association with the bigger picture. And what we really need, what science is telling us, is that we have to prepare ourselves for what's going to happen with the climate crisis. The more of our environmental resources that we destroy, the less prepared we are going to be, in addition to the fact that we cannot live without them. And I hope you understand the science behind the necessity for clean air, clean water, and a healthy biodiversity and ecosystem. We are fortunate enough in South Burlington to have some of those lands. We had wise legislators in our city that preserve those lands for good cause. They are essential to our well-being. So what I'm hoping is, as you look at the housing problem, you do no harm in the environmental crisis we're facing. And by that I'm saying, I really, really urge you to think about the whole and to protect the environment that we have while we can put housing in already developed places, retrofit, renovate, refurbish, renew, build up, but keep our wild spaces and our natural resources, because that's what we're going to need and our future generations are going to need. So thank you for keeping the big picture in mind as you make decisions on individual bills.
Thanks, Roseanne. Next, we'll hear from Chris Trombley.
There was a couple different ways I was thinking about testifying tonight. First, I would like to ratify what Andrew said about Article 12. So Article 12 enhanced our protection of natural resources as defined by riparian connections, our forest, wetlands, expanding those buffers, habitat blocks. I think the Affordable Housing Committee, I'm speaking as an individual, not for the committee, but we supported those protections. I've been disappointed with the conservation PUD as it's been rolled out, because since it's been implemented, we haven't seen any homes built using that tool. So we were excited to see a more compact with a minimum density to result in that, but we haven't seen the homes associated with that. Another downside is that we haven't seen an opportunity where we could see a duplex or a quadplex expanded citywide because of some restricted zoning. I was really encouraged to see S.100 put into place, because it would hold all towns accountable to that same standard. So everyone's carrying that weight instead of one town kind of trying to do it on their own. But on a more personal note, I grew up in a, not a poor household, but my father commuted over an hour every day to work, didn't see him much. I now have a sister that moved out of state, another sister that was in hotel housing due to homelessness. This is stuff that's deeply, deeply personal to me, and I see people impacted by it. It hurts to see a community say, we don't want that kind of housing here. So when my parents want to downsize to something that they can manage, that's a little more affordable, other than a single family home, I want them to have those kind of options, and it doesn't have to be just in one town. It can be whether it's in Lincoln, Vermont, or it's in South Burlington, but they need something that they can afford, single family, and then rental only. We can do that in a way that's more compact and protect our natural resources. I don't think S.100 went far enough. I'm encouraged that there's an Act 250 study that's coming out next year, and I'm excited to see what comes out of that. S.100 is an incremental step forward for long-term zoning progress, combined with significant funding for more short-term needs. So I encourage your support for S.100 as presented to the House. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. And next we'll hear from Dan Albrecht.
Thanks. Just some context for the legislators. When the environmental standards are passed, there were quite a few people who testified. Not so much on the environmental standards themselves, and as a professional planner and former member of the DRB here, I don't have a problem with these standards. People want to say habitat block or wetland buffer, but it was just so darn punitive what the city council did and the planning commission did when they said 70% of the land has to be put in conservation, and then it takes out any acreage a parcel has of habitat block or river corridor or wet or all the environmental standards out of the density calculation. We know really what that's about, okay? Because what's ironic is you've identified the part of the parcel that should be developed, and now you're knocking the density out of it for no good reason. That's not about the environment. Density is the best thing against climate change. Building up anywhere there's water and sewer is good to fight climate change. My neighborhood, 2 blocks from Shelburne Road, we're the model. That's where the city wants to put all the development. Well, we're doing our part already. It's got water and sewer, and it doesn't, and there's no significant natural resources. Then build it. And the 5 acres, the 5 units per acre is a great way. That's what my neighborhood, my lot, 0.16. One of the few neighborhoods, although it's crazy what somebody will pay for my house if they want it. We're not, people should have an ability. It's not just about, oh, we get single family home and everybody else, you get shoved in an apartment. Yeah, that's the Vermont friendly way. Way to go, way to be welcome. That's BS. I'll say that right now. Single family housing is good for me, and good for all, it's good for anybody who's not here to speak, the people moving here, the future residents. So just know, and I'll say it, and it's on the record for many other people, that there was concerns about some of those things in the environmental standards because they were just punitive against the amount of houses that could be built on the part of the parcel that said it was okay to build. So just keep that in mind as you go forward. And municipal water and sewer, that is a tool, and I'd hate to see another carve out. this town, the city's been dealing with special carve-outs for a certain portion of the city for certain things. 20 years ago, remember, it was prime ag, then it was open space, and the climate change thing. What's ironic is that most of South Burlington is within 2 miles of major employers. 2 miles. Dorset, Swift, Spear, 116. Let's use it for crying out. We're not talking about like rural commutes from 40 miles away. 5 minutes, 10 minutes from major employers with good paying jobs. And now we're just gonna zone that out. And it's just silly. Identified, we've already done it with the habitat blocks. It's, whatever I worry about what Mike says about these varying standards. Somebody say, oh, the wetland buffer should be 500 feet. So just keep that in mind as you go forward, that some uniformity makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jan. Next, we'll hear from Fran McDonald.
Yes, hello, thank you for coming. I think that the bill, as originally written, did not include enough provision for natural resource protection. I think if the amendments that Senator Ram Hinsdale added about resource protection and habitat blocks, if those are included in the bill, I think that those protections will help maintain what we look for in terms of climate resolutions and the Global Warming Solutions Act and the State Climate Action Plan. I think it will tie in with the goals of those plans. I think also that some of the impacts that we talk about in South Burlington about the natural resources, those impacts will also impact other cities throughout Vermont when they extend their sewer and water infrastructure. Maybe right now that sewer and water infrastructure in other cities and towns is restricted to the downtown areas. But when those are expanded, that they will start to face the impacts of open lands disappearing to development. So I think we're not just talking about what we see in South Burlington, but what can happen throughout the state. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Next, we'll hear from Ray Gonda.
Ray Gonda, I'm from South Burlington. And I wrote this with the assumption that the amendments that Kesha Ram had written has not been part of the bill, or is not currently part of the bill. It's important to understand what I'm saying now. I'm not good at public speaking, so I'm going to read this, so my apologies. The Omnibus Housing Bill S.100 as written would in one fell swoop disrespectfully destroy the work done by South Burlington in developing land use regulations. It is in effect a slap in the face to the local residents who unselfishly spent thousands of hours collectively thrashing out what would work and what would not work. All of this has achieved the best balance possible between continued development and protection of our natural heritage. And that balance includes affordable housing, denser development, not just single family homes. And it's directed toward infill development in town centers, the very things that this legislation purports to want to happen. What kind of precedent will be set that a municipality cannot pass regulations stricter than those mandated by the state when we have already have wetland rules stricter than the states? What happens to those regulations? We have a regulation that requires new houses to use electricity as an energy source to get and other purposes rather than fossil fuels. What happens to that regulation? At face value, it appears that this proposed legislation will work against mitigating for climate change and against other proposed legislation in the works. How can we protect 30% by 2030 and 50% by 2050 as forest land if we build over it now? How can government function in a reasonable manner when legislators working an hour's drive away exhibit such overreach? This is undemocratic and unreasonable enough as to constitute authoritarianism. What incentive will towns have, if this passes in its present form, to ever do their own planning or zoning or even consider doing so? Are we about to enter an area of state planning from the top being shoved down the throats of the towns? This bill certainly appears to begin that process, regardless of the claimed innocence and virtue of the effort. I humbly ask you to either trash this legislation altogether and start all over, or at a minimum to amend it to protect the current land use regulations and building regulations of our fair city, South Burlington. Thank you.
Thank you. I gotta say, every time that goes off, I think I'm late for work. Right, I'm like, oh, I have like. Woo, all right, next we will hear from Megan Emery.
Thank you, Representative Chasnapp, and I'm very grateful also to Chair Stevens being present. And I just want to reiterate the importance of local authority, because Helen Reilly and I were both reelected last year on this very issue. No one ran against Helen. She won by 100%, and I won by nearly 2/3. This is simply, you know, an additional chance for those who weren't in favor of this local legislation to have it overturned by the state. And I would say if it is, we should all go home, because local control has to do with local government, and this is really dispersing local power in the voters by putting it in the state's hands. The second thing is that I have read these regulations. A lot of what has been said in this room is incorrect. We do allow duplexes through quadplexes throughout the city. I have here is a picture of an example of what could be built in every quadrant of our city, which includes single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, all the way up to quadplexes throughout the city.
By right?
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
And I would also like to say that there is no carve out of any quadrant of the city. If anything, the land development regulations that were approved last spring correct the very issues that many of the people in this room have raised. I also want to produce, here is a map of our water and sewer infrastructure that was put in place decades ago. These are reports put together by Arrowwood that our city contracted with when preparing the habitat blocks, as well as the PUDs, which are allowed by state law. And as you can put those two maps next to the water and sewer, you'll see that there is overlap, that water and sewer in fact conflicts with what we see as really important natural infrastructure and protection of our lake, protection of our residents from flooding. So when we talk about equity, we have to see that inclusionary zoning, in addition to the multiple multiplexes that are allowed throughout our city, were introduced just within the last 2 years in order to ensure that equity throughout the city. And it makes perfect sense for there to be high-rise condos or apartment buildings along our high transit zones, because that's where our public transit is. Champlain Housing Trust won't even build where there isn't public transit. And as someone who is potentially going to live to a ripe old age, I hope, I may want to live in one of those condos as I age in place here in South Burlington. So it is not set aside for a certain group of people. These will be market rate, as well as all different levels, as we see now being developed throughout the city again. And I just want to say, with regard to whim and zeal, we have a professional planner. There's nothing whimsical or zealous about Paul Connor. He has put a letter forward. I just want to reiterate that that letter is available to you, and we really encourage you to look at it.
Thanks so much, Megan. Next, we'll hear from Gary Winslet.
Hi, my name's Gary. I'm a professor of international political economy at Middlebury College. I started living here in South Burlington in 2020 with my wife and our 4-year-old daughter. My wife is a physician assistant in orthopedics. I'm not sure, but I may be the first person speaking that rents and would like to buy a house here and can't. There's 251 towns in Vermont. there's probably none of them where anti-development politics, anti-housing politics causes more harm and makes less sense than South Burlington. You know, if you moved to the Northeast Kingdom or Rochester or Alburg and you kind of don't want development around you, I'm actually kind of sympathetic to that. But you didn't move there, you moved to South Burlington, where you're a mile, 2 miles away from the biggest concentration of jobs and amenities in the state. It doesn't really make sense to think of South Burlington the way we think about 230 to 240 of the other 251 towns in this state. We've actually got to think about priorities. Like, the environment's great. Nobody, including myself, wants to like pave everything. But we can't always say that like keeping the landscape exactly the same has to always be the #1 priority. And housing only can go in places where it doesn't touch anything about the current landscape, right? The priority really should be middle class and working class people being able to afford to own their own homes here, right? So if you go into a lot of places in the SEQ, like Four Sisters Road or whatever, you'll see 3,000 square foot houses. They're in a nice neighborhood, they're cute, it's great. I want middle class and working class people to be able to afford that. And that's just as much a priority as keeping landscapes exactly the way they are. Vermont and South Burlington can grow and develop and be affordable and stay a lot the same. It can't do those things and stay exactly the same, right? And so I'm really asking you to value middle class and working class people being able to afford their own home as actually a higher priority than keeping every landscape the same. S.100 has actually gotten watered down a lot. The Act 250 reforms got completely gutted. There's all these amendments that sort of slow things down further. Like, that's not good. That's contributing to the affordability crisis. If you're a middle class person and you want to own your own home, there are few places in America more policy hostile to you than here. And like, that's a problem. That's a real problem. I will go ahead and say that, you know, if my job didn't keep us here, we would have already left in 2021, 2022. You know, that's how much longer it's going to take you to see an orthopedist if you have a knee problem. We're chasing people out and we're keeping people from moving in, and that really doesn't make sense for South Burlington to do. It really does need to develop as much as it can. That's better for the region, that's better for the Burlington area, that's good for South Burlington. We need to prioritize that middle class housing at least as much as we do landscapes. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gary. Okay, we are down to our last two in person, and then we'll switch to Zoom. And again, if folks feel motivated to add their name, they can add their name. Sure, I'll add you, Michael. All right, so now we will hear from Julian Keenan.
Hi, thanks for holding this event. Yeah, I'm not quite as familiar with like the lingo and all the different designations. I moved here just over 2 years ago with my wife and 3-year-old son. And I don't know all the history, everything that's like come to be. I know there's been a lot of really hard work to preserve the land. Yes, we bought a townhouse in South Village, which is one of the newer developments. And you know, we paid a good amount of money for it, but part of what drew us here was the community, the culture, the healthy food, really a healthy, beautiful place to raise a kid. And we've lived in Boston, we've lived in New Hampshire, we lived in a lot of places throughout the Northeast. And part of what drew us here was there's all different types of people and just a lot of that, you know, lots of positivity, lots of kids playing outside. It's different here. And I think part of what draws people here is the fact that it's different. And I don't know if the answer to trying to have more, I think the answer is to have more housing, of course, because we need to grow. But I don't know if the answer is just to put asphalt over lots of areas where our kids might want to play. Our kids are suffering from mental health problems. Like they need to be outside. We need to be in nature. We need to have that balance of having outdoor recreation so we can all be a healthy, happy, thriving community, but also be inclusive. And I do think that this goes too far, and people are talking a lot about economic development and just saying, yeah, you know, we gotta just build. Yeah, we should build, but to just like go over the most beautiful areas that we all rely on to be happy and thrive as a community, we're gonna kill that community and just be like a flyover, just drive in, consume, and then it's just gonna be consume. How are we different from Boston? How are we different from all these places? We can still get better, we can still grow, but I still think we should try to build units. I live in a townhouse. I love the townhouse. I can walk 5 minutes and be in forest. Other people should have that too. Other people should be able to do that. And there's no reason why we can't like build new units in areas where it's not just going over some of the most beautiful places that we can spend time with our family and our community. So let's strike a balance if we can, please.
Thank you so much. All right, next we'll hear Evan.
Evan Langfeld from O'Brien Brothers. So I thought I'd just make a couple of general statements. And actually, I think I'll start off with just responding to the testimony that was provided by the South Burlington City Council to the House and Senate about S.100. And I can speak to our experience. And I think while the council, the planning commission and the various committees that have worked on the updated land development regulations have made a lot of effort, all good intentioned, I believe, over the last several years. I think the reality on the ground is actually much different. We're coming out of a 40-month permitting process to develop housing here in South Burlington on a site that is zoned for housing. This same site, which is surrounded by the interstate, the airport, the biggest employers in the city and some of the biggest employers in the state, and surrounded by development patterns, was also identified by one of the interim zoning committees for conservation as a wildlife tract. That same 90 acres that was identified as a wildlife tract is actually the same zone that we're building 155 homes on, slated to break ground on next week. It's the first 100% fossil fuel free microgrid community in the state and one of the first in the country. And those are 155 new families that wouldn't be able to occupy those homes, but for the fact that we got out in front and actually followed our preliminary plat permit to get vested prior to those changes coming in to conserve that site. And the only reason we were able to do that is 4 years prior to that, when interim zoning was enacted and we were included in interim zoning, we had to make an argument to not be included in interim zoning zone. Had we not been able to claw ourselves out of that, that entire area would have been conserved. And so I think the challenge with some of the good intentions and some of the good changes that have been made, I think there are good intentions, there are some good changes that have been made, but some of them aren't actually coming to fruition the way they are touted. And I think some of the other ones that were mentioned in there are the affordable housing bonuses that are provided. It's great when you provide an affordable housing bonus to incent developers to develop it, but if you can't actually achieve those bonuses to offset the fact that you're building affordable housing at a loss, what's the point of it? If you can't go up, which as Dan pointed out, is the most environmentally friendly way to build, you can't do it because you're still limited to these absurdly low height restrictions in the vast majority of the city of South Burlington. You also can't exceed your coverage ratios. So you, on a single family development or a townhome development, you might have gotten these bonuses, but you can't build it. You can't ever receive that incentive. So people just don't do it. So while we put these regulations into effect, in fact, they're not actually achievable. And so I think I don't want to say it's disingenuous, but I think it's a little bit of gaslighting to say that the city of South Burlington has made all these notable achievements when in fact, they're not really moving the needle. And I think what you're still seeing is the fruits of that we're still underwater in terms of the housing crisis. Generally speaking, in terms of good land use, in addition to going up, you got to maximize the investments that you've already made in infrastructure. If you have it there, build it there so it doesn't get built out in the middle of a cornfield in rural, Newport or wherever. I think the gentleman over there put it very well. You're going to see sprawl elsewhere unless you maximize in areas where you should have density. South Burlington is not an island. South Burlington is the second biggest municipality in the state. It is exactly the place we should be developing. The one last thing I will say, I know I'm over my limit, but I believe, could be wrong, maybe speculation, but I think every person that's spoken in this room against S.100 is living in a single family home. And so again, from an equity perspective, I think that's
not sorry. I live in a townhouse, but yeah.
It's all right.
Lower density, I should say. I'll correct myself. And
Neighborhood.
I should, well, but I'll strike that.
That's okay. All right, thank you so much, Evan. All right, now we're gonna move on to our folks on Zoom and then we'll circle back to, yep, Sarah, did you wanna sign up?
Just curious, I put my name on a list outside, but I.
Oh, you know what? I think you put it on just the city sign up sheet.
Oh.
Okay,
That's what I
that was
waiting
confusing.
for.
That's okay. I'll add you. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so first on our screen, and Martin, if you don't mind,
Emily?
yes.
I think you're gonna come back to me and
Yeah,
Sarah.
we are. We'll shift gears a little bit. It's because these folks have been waiting so patiently. First I see Donna Laban. If you'd like to, it looks like you're already unmuted, so take it away.
Yes, hi, thanks and good evening. Donna Laban, I am a member of the Planning Commission, a new member, so I haven't really done anything much yet. But I'm speaking as myself, a citizen in South Burlington, a resident of Village at Dorset Park, which was a fairly early community that was developed at 5 units an acre, adjacent to the southeast quadrant. It's quite a nice place to live because it is somewhat surrounded by natural areas. So I'm going to get back to that though. The first point I wanted to make, because I haven't heard anybody address this, and that has to do with housing development in areas with currently having water and sewer. That's one thing that South Burlington has extended water and sewer lines throughout a lot of the city, but it doesn't actually have the capacity. I mean, none of the facilities have the capacity to develop 100% of the area that's adjacent to those water and sewer lines. And so my question is, how, I think it's fair to say that not all of the areas served by the water and sewer lines can be developed because there just isn't that much sewage capacity. And I would like to see South Burlington do more work to prioritize where that water and sewage capacity can go. I think you kind of get the drift of what I'm saying. The second point I wanted to make is that, as I said before, 5 units an acre is a very reasonable density. A combination of townhouse development, single family on 6-acre lots. I personally would like to see higher height limits allowed in the city to allow 3-story in some cases, so that you can have townhouses over an in-law apartment in a more urban type setting, as opposed to only having center hall or having elevator served buildings providing higher density housing. I think there's a lot of models that we just haven't seen a lot of architectural design flexibility or creativity in South Burlington, because we keep seeing the same things over and over again. And it's not providing for what the middle ground really would be willing to settle for. If you can't have a single family house, at least have a nice townhouse with some natural area nearby. So the 5 units an acre, as I said before, is certainly reasonable if you also allow for natural resource areas to be protected nearby. I think the two have to go hand in hand. 5 units an acre across the entire city would be a pretty awful place to live, because it just wouldn't give you any breathing room. And I think natural areas for not only flood protection, but also to allow plenty of area, the lungs of the city, allow it to breathe. It's very important. The last point I wanted to make has to do with the energy code. A lot of people seem to be assuming that the energy code that there's anything in the energy code that deals with fuel choice. There isn't. Current energy code in Vermont it's fuel neutral. So, anything that there's nothing in the energy code that's going to restrict what South Burlington can say as far as fuel choice. And I think it's done the right thing by not allowing fossil fuels as the majority or as the primary heat source in new construction. So I think that's about it.
Up there, Donna?
Pardon?
Your time is up.
Okay, I'm done.
All right, perfect, thank you.
Thanks so much, Donna. Moving over on our screen is Beth.
Hi there. I'll start up my video for this. Hopefully you can see me okay. Hi, and thank you for letting me speak. I've learned a lot being in the room virtually tonight from folks on both sides of this issue. I just want to start by saying that, by pointing out this clause in S.100 that precludes municipalities from enacting building codes that are stricter than the state codes. With regards to the types of energy that new construction can use. I just want to express the strongest opposition to that clause in the legislation. I don't know how it got there. I don't see how that sort of legislation will help us address the climate crisis, which is something that we should all be thinking about. Especially the younger folks in the room, all of us, anyone who cares about anything at all should be gravely concerned about this crisis and preventing local municipalities from enacting building codes that require a swift move away from fossil fuels is absurd, frankly. So I want to express opposition in that regard. And also, as far as the housing crisis goes, I agree with a lot of what was said in the room. I think that denser housing makes total sense. I think that building tall buildings makes total sense. And on that note, I actually disagree with the folks in the room who seem to have the opinion that people don't want to live in tall buildings and that's, just for poor people, that's where we're going to shove all the poor people. I think that's not borne out in large cities. I spent a lot of my adult life living in large cities like New York and Philadelphia, also abroad. And people like living in those buildings. Rich people, middle income people, poor people. A lot of people like living close to amenities. They like the fact that they're in the downtown centers. So I think that we need to, a lot of people in Vermont have this notion of the perfect place to live being, this very idyllic location, but a lot of folks actually like living in those buildings. In fact, I would like to one day downsize into a small apartment. So I have an issue with that sort of thinking. I think that's something that Vermont needs to sort of look beyond its borders and see how other people are living in other states. And I also have a comment and a question about this legislation, which will allow encroachment on the natural areas in South Burlington. And my question and my comment and my question are these. Once we have built out, assuming we are allowed to build out, into the natural areas in South Burlington, where in the legislation does it say that we can't go beyond South Burlington and build more sewer and electricity infrastructure? This is what happens. This is the slippery slope, and there's nothing in the legislation that will prevent that. So my opinion, and I think this is borne out by a lot of literature that I've seen. I have, I work at the university, so I have access to the library there. There's plenty of research showing that when you build infrastructure, you build more infrastructure and you build more housing. So there's nothing in this legislation that says, okay, we're going to wall off South Burlington. South Burlington is where all the housing is going to go. Once South Burlington is built out, I'd like the developers in the room to answer this question. Are you going to put your shovels away and stop there? Or are we going to build more infrastructure and we're going to spread out into the natural lands that supposedly this legislation is going to address and prevent?
So Beth, you're a bit over your time. So if you just wrap up.
Anyway, that's what I have to say. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you so much. Next we'll go to John.
Hi, everybody. I'm the chair of the Economic Development Committee here in South Burlington. And as a group, we voted to have the new LDRs studied from an economic perspective before enacted, and they weren't. So I'll just bring up 2 points that we addressed when we studied this a bit, and they seem to be coming home to roost. One is that a pipe is a terrible thing to waste. I was a South Burlington voter, and long before the NRP and Habitat blocks, we voted to pass bonds to build this infrastructure, and we intended it to be fully utilized. A sewer main can cost more than $2,000 a linear foot to put in, not to mention all the other infrastructure involved. So, our current zoning is really forcing millions of dollars of investment to be either underutilized or permanently abandoned. And I think that's a bad decision, and I think it's a bad thing for the state to do as well. Another thing we talked about is, we're all excited to try to make a contribution to reduce climate change and CO2 emissions. But the biggest contribution we could make right now, before the EVs, get fully in place and before all the heat pumps are installed, is to reduce the car trips with existing cars. And unfortunately, our well-intended zoning regulations are really hurting our regional workforce housing to a point where people are forced to live further away. And it's really reducing our progress towards our transportation goals by driving up commuting and increasing our CO2 emissions. So I think those 2 points are important, and I do support S.100 as it's written so far. I would like to have the Act 250 clauses put back in because I do think that it's been reduced dramatically, but any progress in my mind is very appropriate. So that's all I've got to say.
Thanks so much, John. All right, moving across the screen, we have Dan.
Hi, Dan Jenkins, resident in South Burlington. I just wanted to comment and say, well, I am a pro-development guy, and I think building is the economic strategy for growth here in the county and in the state. It needs to be done in concert with considerations to the environment. So I would just look at some of the kind of clauses which may have had amendments put to them. I think I was hearing Andrew mention that, but just we need to be cognizant of what was set up for habitat blocks, for corridors, for our wildlife, and for our natural resources and kind of the protected lands that have been set up previously in this town. The other major thing that I would say just about ramming into this area is our schools are already incredibly flooded with people. We're putting in modular units right now to offset ramped up population. When we're putting in all of these, where are these kids going to go to school? What's our plan for growing our school system, aside from asking for $300 million to build new high schools for the town that don't really take care of the problem that there's, multiple elementary schools that have problems and our middle schools have maxed out problems. So I guess my point is just be considerate as we move forward with this, considerate of the environment and considerate of what this town can actually take on for population. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. All right, moving across the screen, we have Jean.
Hi, thanks. I just want to thank Megan and Helen and anybody who's worked on the city council who has tried to preserve as much land as possible. I am a low income person and I would live in a box if I could have more open land. And I just think the human species, I have such concerns that all we think about is growth, more, bigger, better. And ultimately, I have never been in a place where more, bigger, growth, better has equaled better. And I would move out of South Burlington if I could, but I can't afford to. I bought my house when the housing prices were much lower. And I don't think it's ever going to be enough. I think we'll develop however much we can, and then we're going to want to develop all that much more. And the previous speakers spoke of the schools, and I worked in the healthcare system, and there's already a huge problem with access to healthcare. So again, I don't think it's thought through. All it is we need more housing. And I hugely empathize with low income and middle income people who do need housing. I totally empathize with that. But I think ignoring the ecological aspect of this, which I just think as a society, we seem incapable of having that as a lens through everything we do. And it will be to our demise, and it already is to our demise to ignore that. And I don't see much of any of that mentioned. And I see the developments. Also, they're monoculture lawns. My lawn is very wild. I have so many species of insects, bees, but I feel like there's very little education about and with developments on how to create more space for any kind of wildlife. So it always amuses me to see all the names of the streets. Like I just saw a new one on Facebook today for a new development, Spear Meadows. And I would like all the street signs to be changed to killed off the meadows and created monoculture. Bluebird Lane, killed off all the bluebirds to build more. I don't know. It's so frustrating to me that people do not have an ecological lens. And again, I'm hugely empathetic to needing housing, but I just don't think destroying things is the answer. I also believe we should build up. I don't see why, if you're already having a 3-story building, why not make it 10 stories? I mean, that space is already used. Anyway, and I know it's a complicated issue and I do have empathy, but it just makes me very sad. And I'm glad I'm the age I am, so I don't have to see more destroyed. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jean. Okay, now we have someone in the overflow room.
Thank you. Yes,
Robust turnout.
My name is James Rustad. I grew up in South Burlington and I returned here to Vermont to raise my family. As a previous speaker said, it is different here. It's special. I really appreciate all the work that's went into S.100 and the housing issue and you all being here tonight. And I know it's late and a lot of people want to speak. I did come here tonight with my family to offer our strong support for an amendment to protect wildlife corridors, as Mr. Chalnick and Ms. Emery detailed. I think S.100 goes too far, and I hope you all support a reasonable amendment that balances the housing crisis with responsible environmental stewardship. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Sandy Dooley.
First, I want to thank you for doing this. I want to point out that while Councilor Emery is correct that there is no place in the city where you can't build a duplex, she didn't tell you how much land you have to have in some parts of the city to build a duplex. If you have a parcel less than 4 acres in most of the southeast quadrant, you would have to have 1.1 acre parcel to build a duplex. That's a lot of land that would be very costly. The basic zoning in the southeast quadrant is 1.2 units per acre. If you buy TDRs in these lots that are less than 4 acres, you can now build 1.8 units per acre. If you have a 1 acre lot, you can't build a duplex. This was changed in the rules that were done last year. You used to, if you bought TDRs, you used to be able to have 4 units per acre, but that was changed. Now we have been told that this is on the list to correct by the Planning Commission. It has now been over a year. And when Tesla wants a zoning change, it can happen very quickly. It's not happening here. And I know that Habitat was interested in buying a 1 acre lot and doing a fourplex in the southeast quadrant. But the owner said, you can't do it. You can't build more than 1 house per acre. So anyway, as Councilor Emery said, is correct. But in some places, you have to have a lot of land to do so. One of the tragedies that I see out of the rules that were done last year is that some of the most visionary developments in the southeast quadrant could not be done under the new regulations. And I cite South Village and I cite Rye Meadows. I cite Village at Dorset Park. It doesn't have as much conserved land, but it's right next to Wheeler Nature Park. So both South Village and Rye Meadows and also South Point have Rye Meadows doesn't have as much, but it has multiple housing types, which is really important. So does South Village. South Village has a lot of conserved land. And so, and also South Point has a lot of conserved land. I also want to mention that the NRP zones that were created 20 years ago are one thing. We've had a lot of problems with the TDRs not being bought, but what did the City Council and Planning Commission do last year? They added more NRP land. And on top of that, you can't build a traditional neighborhood development PUD in the Southeast Quadrant unless you have a parcel that's at least 13.3 acres, which means that your 30% equals 4 acres, which means you can do a PUD. That PUD type requires multiple housing types. It's really something that would be somewhat modeled, I believe, on South Village. It's just a tragedy that you can't build a TRD PUD in the Southeast Quadrant unless you have a parcel of 13.3 acres, because the only thing you can build in the Southeast Quadrant outside of the Village area is a conservation PUD. I'll just say again, some of the most visionary housing in South Burlington over the last 20, 30 years developments can't be built because of these regulations.
Thanks,
And so
Sandy.
I support S.100.
All right, thanks so much, Sandy. So we have a few more people left and we gotta go quick. I don't wanna limit people's speaking, but we have a time limit. Okay, I can't see, is it Daniel? Okay, Daniel.
Hey, thank you. I'll be as quick as I can here. One, I've only lived in South Burlington 17 years, but the amount of development that we've had in that time has been intense. And I'm thinking about City Center. I'm thinking about the O'Brien brothers on Kennedy Drive. I'm thinking about Spear Meadows. I'm thinking about along Spear Street. I mean, South Burlington has done more than its share to build housing of all different styles and price points. And the notion that we're now going to rip up the NRP to cram more housing in, it just doesn't make sense. I want to pick up on what Mr. Jenkins said. He was talking about overcrowding in schools. What about the roads? Where are all the people, where are all the cars going to go? We got one-lane roads going in and out of Spear Street, Williston Road, Shelburne Road. The traffic is intense already. Where are all the people who are going to live in these new houses going to put their cars, and what's the traffic going to be like? Lastly, you talk about a housing crisis. I think there are three things that contributed to the housing crisis, primarily the current one. One, houses converted to short-term rentals like Airbnb. That takes houses out of the market for long-term rentals and sale. Two, second homes. I've seen statistics as many as 18% of all Vermont houses are second homes. And three, and no disrespect to anybody who fits into this category, we've got climate migrants and COVID migrants who move to Vermont but telecommute to jobs in other states. There are ways to deal with these situations from a tax policy standpoint that would drastically improve the housing situation without paving over the little bits of open space that we have left in South Burlington. And this bill, this one-size-fits-all bill for the whole state, when South Burlington has done its part and then some, and is dealing with short-term rentals, second home, et cetera, it just doesn't make sense. And I just hope that our legislative delegation here will do the right thing here and protect those parts of South Burlington that need and deserve protection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And before we switch to our last couple online, I will respect that we had some folks sign up previously in person that were missed. So can we hear from Michael?
Yeah, so I'm Michael Mittag and I've lived in South Burlington for about 20 odd years. And I am a planning commissioner. I have been since 2017. I don't want to take a lot of time. I'll be quick. There's a lot of things that have been said tonight which amount to business as usual. The state regulations, which my esteemed colleague Mike has alluded to, a lot of them were made decades ago, before we had any idea about climate change and that we needed to mitigate for it. So saying that we need to go back to what was enacted back then is a step backwards for the climate and for our the health and well-being of our community. So it's not a matter of being inconsistent, it's a matter of necessity. And South Burlington is progressive, and somebody said we're special. Yes, we are special. We're doing things that other communities haven't got the wherewithal, either the commitment of the community or the skill set that's required to promote these kinds of regulations, which are all designed to help us with climate change mitigation and the impacts that they will have on us. Somebody said that 70% of a planned conservation, a conservation PUD is not enough because the conservation resources are taken off the density from the 30% that can be built on. That's not correct. The 70% includes those resources. They are counted in as part of the 70%. So it's just a matter of correcting the record here. And I know that Evan, I've worked a lot with Evan on the Planning Commission, and Evan and his colleagues were intimately involved in the writing of our inclusionary zoning ordinance. So we shouldn't complain because we did it together. And if we made a mistake, it's not, we shouldn't complain, we did it together. My 30 seconds is up. So things have changed. Somebody said that nothing's changing here. Things have changed. Give me those 30 seconds. We've got a lot of development. Dan Seth mentioned it. Spear Meadows, 49 or 50 units. O'Brien, there may be maybe 900 homes in the end when the project is completed, if I read correctly. So, you know, that's a lot of development here. We've got South Village, we've got South Point, and South Point used their TDRs, the ones that they had on their property, to conserve space and get high density in the other part of their property. And it's something that's been done all over the place. It's been done at Cider Mill, it's been done by South Village. So a lot of TDRs have been used. Maybe we don't see them as being sales, but they are used. And this ordinance, I mean, these NPR zones were made in 2006 purposely. We did it to ourselves. We did it on purpose. The NPRs and the TDRs, Transferable Development Ordinance, is the primary way of conserving land in South Burlington. And we shouldn't mess with that. It's a really good thing.
All right, hate to do it to you. Next, we're gonna have our last person in person, Sarah Dopp.
Hi, I'm Sarah Dopp. A lot of what I was going to say has been well expressed by others, but first of all, I just want to set the record straight again that not everybody who lives in the Southeast Quadrant is made of money. I'm one of those people. I inherited my home. It was built in the early 1800s, so I didn't exactly have anything to do with configuring the area. It was a farm. Talk about change. You know, it's a 360 change, of course, in that period of time. But anyway, we do have precious resources in the Southeast Quadrant. That's where they happen to be. It's not because people are well off in the Southeast Quadrant that we wanted to save them. It's because they are invaluable to our existence going forward. I think it's important for us to sort of roll back to the central premise of S.100 when it was first conceived. As I understand it, the idea was to concentrate housing development in whatever the community had designated in whatever way as village center, city center, high growth area, whatever. So each community would make that assessment and determine where their growth should be. And I can't say that South Burlington is the only special community in Vermont. There may be many others that have unique situations that I don't know anything about. But I think that it's important to preserve the local control aspect of this. Focus on the idea that we want to put our growth into the areas where there's already growth and that can be expanded in those areas, but not to eat up our natural resources at the same time. I think the point that was made about the resources of the city at large is hugely important. And we don't have anything, I think some communities like Williston, for instance, has an ordinance or a rule, zoning rule, that defines the pace at which growth can take place so that it can be gradually assimilated and adjusted to, and the services can keep up. We don't have anything like that. So what we do is big spurts of 900 here and 300 there and 50 somewhere else, kind of all at once, so that we always have a ton in the pipeline. I don't think that works very well. So I'd like to see us refocus on the core idea of S.100 to put our growth where our city council has defined it. We can maybe make those words a little clearer, but we know where they are and why they're there. It's not because all the rich people in the SEQ don't want growth out there. That's where the natural resources are.
All right, thanks. So now we will shift back to our last two speakers before we wrap up, and let's hear from Amanda.
Hi, I wanted to thank you for holding this event and your time, and everybody who spoke, many of whom have said things very well. And so I was looking for something slightly different to say. And one of the things that I was thinking of is that the developments on Spear Street and many other places are not really middle working class homes. I mean, there are some, but many times developers aren't building smaller homes because larger homes are more lucrative, in the same way that auto companies promote pickup trucks and SUVs because those are the most lucrative. There's a lot of studies that show that lack of access to trees and nature makes people less healthy and makes them unhealthy. So I think it's incredibly important that we design our city and our housing in a way that protects natural resources, wildlife corridors, habitat blocks, and waterfront buffers. Someone else who spoke earlier pointed out that they can walk from their condo to a park and wildlife areas, and everybody should have access to natural areas. And we don't have control over everybody in the country, but we do have control, and we should have control over our own community. I would also just like to point out that many of the houses being built in South Burlington and communities aren't well planned by developers again, or I don't exactly know all the details, but they don't allow for walking and biking. As a matter of fact, a bicyclist was killed in October on Heinsberg Road across from Butler Drive by a car. For all the housing built on Spear Street and Dorset and Heinsberg, they're only accessible by car, even for short trips, just because there isn't a safe way to get by foot or by bicycle. So I think that I would ask that please make sure that whatever legislation you go forward with allows for both protection of natural areas, for the health of our people and for the climate, and also for walkable, bikeable cities. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And our last speaker before I finish this up is Jimmy Lees. Jimmy, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, so S.100, I think, is doing the wrong thing in South Burlington. The legislature, especially this committee and this committee chair, has the opportunity to do something where housing existed and where the state has control, which is the control over the Vermont Air National Guard, whose military jets have caused 44 acres of that was housing to be demolished, and 3,000 units of housing to be degraded and to become unsuitable for residential use, according to the Air Force, because of this incredible 115 decibel F-35 jet. This training of the National Guard is under the control of the state. The state could put a stop to it so that those 44 acres would be required to be restored to housing. It's publicly owned land. The city of Burlington owns it, and they would be required under their grant assurances with the FAA to sell the land for housing. It could be affordable housing. It could be high density housing. This is the place to restore housing before we demolish open fields and pristine lands in South Burlington. We have, by contrast, in Wheeler Nature Park, a small area of privatized land that's going to do incredible damage to the nature park if that becomes housing for 32 units of housing. And some of us are now in the environmental court to prevent that from happening. But this legislation could undermine that Act 250 case. So we have the opportunity. Here is the choice before the committee. Put back the 44 acres. It could be hundreds and hundreds of units of affordable housing, and protect the open fields in South Burlington. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. And I think real quick, Gary, did you want to say something?
No, I'll go if other people are going as well, but if.
Okay, we have, so our city councilors have to jet to their 6:30 meeting. I know it was crammed in. Thank you so much.
Send those.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
to Sue.
Is it open?
Thank you. Oh, we're still, so I just wanna quickly say I'm so grateful and appreciative of the level of engagement that we have from our community. We're really lucky. Folks from all across the city came out tonight and missed dinner with their families or other things, and it truly is a privilege for people that do have the capacity to come out and raise their voice and share their stories. And I will continue to work hard to bring in all voices into the process and reach out to folks who may not have the time or capacity to come. For me, housing is a top priority, and I'm grateful to be on that committee. And Chair Stevens had to run off, but just really thankful that he took the time to come tonight and listen to our community's experiences. And I look forward to continued conversation as things evolve and where they land in the House. Would anyone else like to add to that?
Appreciate everybody coming out.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.